Top 1. The Spear of Destiny. In March 1938, as German troops marched into Vienna during the Anschluss, one of Adolf Hitler's first unofficial visits was not to a government office or military command center. It was to the Hofburg treasury. Locked behind thick glass and centuries of imperial symbolism rested a relic known as the Holy Lance, or the Spear of Destiny. According to legend, this was the spear that pierced the side of Jesus during the crucifixion. Those who possessed it, the legend claimed, held the fate of the world in their hands. The timing was precise. Within hours of Austria's annexation, SS officers cataloged the spear and arranged for its transfer to Nuremberg. The move was not ceremonial. It was logged under special cultural protection orders. Witnesses later testified that Hitler stood in silence before the relic, studying its iron tip, which measured roughly 7 inches long, encased in a gold sleeve added during the medieval period. The spearhead itself weighed nearly 1.1 pounds and showed metallurgical traits consistent with ancient Roman weaponry, though its exact origin remains debated. Historians have long argued that the spear's power was symbolic rather than mystical. Yet documents recovered after the war reveal that Heinrich Himmler commissioned private studies analyzing the relic's construction and historical trajectory. The research focused not only on its material composition, but on the sequence of rulers who had possessed it: Constantine, Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperors. Each had presided over vast territories. The pattern, to those immersed in esoteric belief systems, was not coincidence. It was continuity. Photographs from 1938 show SS officers measuring the spear's dimensions in inches and documenting microscopic markings along its blade. Internal memos referenced energetic resonance and historical alignment. The language was careful, clinical, yet unmistakably obsessive. This was not a museum artifact. It was being evaluated like a strategic asset. When Allied forces closed in during April 1945, the spear was hidden in a vault beneath Nuremberg Castle. On April 30, the same day Hitler died in Berlin, American troops recovered it. Within days, the Third Reich collapsed. Some later suggested the loss of the relic symbolized the breaking of a psychological pillar. Others dismissed it as myth layered over military failure. But the record shows something undeniable. The regime invested time, personnel, and classified research into a medieval weapon. It was guarded as if it mattered beyond heritage. If the Spear of Destiny was merely a relic of iron and legend, why was it treated as a cornerstone of imperial continuity? And if those in power believed it could shape fate, what does that reveal about the foundations upon which the Third Reich was built? Top 2. The Holy Grail. In 1940, as German forces advanced through occupied France, a lesser-known mission unfolded far from the front lines. While tanks rolled across Europe, a specialized SS research unit traveled quietly toward the foothills of the Pyrenees. Their destination was Montségur, a fortress perched more than 3,900 feet above sea level, long associated with the Cathars and whispered legends of the Holy Grail. The official records describe the journey as an archaeological survey. Unofficial correspondence told a different story. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, had become deeply invested in the idea that the Holy Grail was not merely a Christian relic, but a vessel of ancient knowledge tied to bloodlines, sovereignty, and transcendence. The Grail, in his view, was a symbol of sacred authority that predated the church itself. Montségur had fallen in 1244 after a brutal siege. According to legend, just before the fortress surrendered, a small group of Cathars escaped down the mountain under cover of darkness, carrying with them a mysterious treasure. Some claimed it was gold. Others insisted it was something far more valuable. By the 20th century, speculation centered on the Grail. SS researchers combed through the ruins with surveying tools and excavation equipment, mapping chambers and underground passages. Reports measured wall thickness in feet, analyzed stone composition, and cataloged cavities within the mountain's limestone structure. Ground-penetrating methods of the era were primitive, yet the team documented anomalies in substructures beneath the fortress plateau. Internal documents reference object recovery potential and ritual continuity. Simultaneously, Himmler was transforming Wewelsburg Castle in Germany into what he envisioned as a spiritual center for the SS. The North Tower, designed as a ceremonial chamber, mirrored Arthurian mythology. 12 stone seats were arranged around a circular hall, echoing the Knights of the Round Table. The Grail legend was not treated as fiction. It was integrated into ideological architecture. After the war, many of the excavation notes from Montségur were reported missing. Some were found partially burned. Others were classified under cultural property investigations and never fully released. French authorities confirmed that the SS presence in the region had been substantial, yet the purpose remained officially described as historical interest. If the Holy Grail was nothing more than medieval poetry, why dispatch a paramilitary research division into occupied territory during wartime? Why align elite officers with chivalric myth and ritual symbolism? Why construct a ceremonial stronghold in Germany that mirrored Grail legend at its core? The Third Reich was obsessed with legitimacy, ancestry, and destiny. The Grail represented not wealth, but divine sanction. And in regimes built on mythic narratives, sanction can be more powerful than steel. If they believed the Grail embodied a lost authority older than nations, then the search was not about a cup. It was about rewriting spiritual inheritance itself. Top 3, the Ark of the Covenant. In 1938, while much of Europe focused on the escalating political crisis, a quiet directive was issued within a lesser-known branch of the SS known as the Ahnenerbe. Officially, the order concerned Near Eastern archaeological research. Unofficially, it centered on one of the most powerful objects described in biblical history, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark was said to be a gold-covered wooden chest measuring approximately 4 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and 2.5 feet high. According to ancient Hebrew texts, it contained the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments and radiated divine power. It was described as capable of leveling armies, stopping rivers, and striking down those who approached it improperly. In some interpretations, it functioned almost like a contained energy source, lethal when mishandled. German research teams during the late 1930s intensified studies of Ethiopian manuscripts and Middle Eastern temple records. Particular attention was given to the Church of St. Mary of Zion in Axum, Ethiopia, where local tradition claims the Ark resides under constant guard. Diplomatic inquiries were made under cultural research pretenses. Ethnographic reports were compiled. Measurements of ancient temple foundations were cross-referenced with biblical descriptions. Internal memos recovered after the war reference Object X and Levitical containment apparatus. While no document directly confirms a physical expedition to seize the Ark, the level of scholarly and logistical preparation suggests more than idle curiosity. The Ahnenerbe did not merely catalog myths, it sought tangible proof of ancestral or divine artifacts that could reinforce ideological supremacy. Some Nazi theorists speculated that the Ark was not mystical, but technological. They theorized it could have been an ancient device capable of generating electrical discharge, pointing to biblical descriptions of lethal proximity and radiant phenomena. Engineers within the SS reportedly examined ancient schematics and ritual texts through the lens of electrical theory, attempting to reinterpret divine wrath as measurable force. After 1945, several files concerning Middle Eastern artifact research were either classified or listed as destroyed during Allied bombing raids. American intelligence units investigating Nazi occult research documented references to biblical relics, but concluded no Ark had been located. However, portions of the Ahnenerbe archives were never fully recovered. If the Ark was simply religious symbolism, why analyze it with engineers rather than theologians? Why dedicate wartime resources to studying temple blueprints thousands of miles from Berlin? Why categorize the research under restricted cultural operations? The Ark represented absolute authority. In Scripture, it was not carried by kings, it carried them. Its presence signified divine endorsement. For a regime obsessed with destiny and sacred mandate, such an object would not be superstition, it would be strategic. Whether they believed the Ark could unleash energy or simply legitimize power, the intent was unmistakable. The Third Reich did not only wage war with weapons, it searched for artifacts that could sanctify conquest itself. Top 4, the Irminsul Relic. In 1935, a classified memorandum circulated within the SS Research Division known as the Ahnenerbe. The document referenced a destroyed sacred pillar once venerated by the ancient Saxons. Its name was Irminsul. According to early medieval chronicles, the structure had stood as a colossal wooden column, possibly more than 30 feet tall, symbolizing a cosmic axis that connected heaven and earth. It was destroyed in 772 AD by Charlemagne during his campaign to forcibly convert the Saxons to Christianity. Official history recorded its destruction, but it never recorded whether fragments survived. The memorandum described renewed archaeological surveys in the Teutoburg forest region of Germany. Excavation grids were measured in feet and marked with iron stakes. Soil density was analyzed. Charcoal fragments were cataloged and tested for age. The goal was not general research, it was targeted recovery. Internal language referred to ancestral restoration and pre-Christian sacred continuity. SS officers believed Irminsul represented the spiritual backbone of the ancient Germanic world. If rediscovered, even in fragment form, it would symbolize the revival of an indigenous belief system predating Christianity. In ideological terms, this was critical. The regime sought to sever ties with what it saw as foreign religious influence and replace it with mythic ancestral authority. Reports from 1936 mention the discovery of unusual post holes in a circular formation, each measuring roughly 18 inches in diameter. Burn patterns in the surrounding soil suggested a large timber structure had once stood there. Fragments of charred oak were extracted and sealed in labeled containers. The samples were transported to Berlin under restricted documentation. Photographic evidence from the dig was limited. Several images referenced in field logs do not appear in surviving archives. A later Allied intelligence summary noted that certain excavation records were missing from Ahnenerbe files recovered in 1945. The absence was never explained. If Irminsul had been completely annihilated in the 8th century, why conduct large-scale excavations more than 1,000 years later? Why classify soil samples and restrict access to archaeological photographs? Why frame the recovery effort as spiritual reclamation rather than historical curiosity? The Irminsul was not gold. It was not jeweled. It offered no battlefield advantage in conventional terms. Its power lay in symbolism. It represented an origin story untainted by external doctrine. For a regime obsessed with ancestral legitimacy, such a relic would serve as ideological foundation. Whether fragments were truly recovered remains uncertain. The excavations ended abruptly as the war intensified. Sites were closed, records thinned, personnel were reassigned. If a sacred pillar once stood as the axis of a civilization, and if even remnants of it were found, what might that mean for a regime attempting to reconstruct an ancient identity? Top 5. The Crown of Charlemagne. In September 1938, during a carefully orchestrated rally in Nuremberg, Adolf Hitler stood beneath banners and floodlights, invoking the memory of Charlemagne. To the public, it was rhetoric. To those within the regime's inner circle, it was something more calculated. Charlemagne was not simply a medieval ruler. He was crowned emperor in 800 AD and became the symbolic founder of a unified Christian Europe. For a regime intent on constructing a 1,000-year Reich, historical continuity was not optional. It was essential. The imperial regalia of the Holy Roman Empire, including the crown associated with Charlemagne, had long been preserved in Vienna. The crown itself, composed of 8 hinged gold plates set with precious stones and enamel images, measured approximately 8 inches in height and weighed close to 7 pounds. Each plate carried biblical iconography. It was less a piece of jewelry than a statement of divine legitimacy. Following the Anschluss in March 1938, the regalia were transferred from Vienna to Nuremberg under direct orders. Officially, this was described as cultural repatriation. Internally, it was described as restoration of rightful heritage. Documents show SS officers supervised the relocation personally. The crown was transported under armed guard and placed in a specially secured vault beneath Nuremberg Castle. Why the urgency? Why move medieval artifacts during a period of mounting military tension? Hitler frequently referenced the Holy Roman Empire as a precursor to his own ambitions. By possessing the regalia, he symbolically positioned himself within a lineage of emperors. Photographs from state ceremonies show the artifacts displayed prominently, though rarely handled. The emphasis was on association, not spectacle. Researchers within the Ahnenerbe examined the regalia's inscriptions, gemstone origins, and construction methods. Reports measured gold purity in carats and analyzed the crown's structural engineering. The language used in these studies suggests more than antiquarian interest. Phrases such as continuity of imperial authority and transmission of sacred sovereignty appear repeatedly. When Allied forces advanced in 1945, the regalia were hidden in a bunker carved into solid rock. American troops recovered them in April. The Third Reich fell shortly thereafter. The crown was eventually returned to Austria. Unlike the spear or the Grail, the crown of Charlemagne was undeniably real. It carried no claims of supernatural force. Its power was psychological and historical. It embodied the concept of divinely sanctioned rule across centuries. If relics like the spear suggested mystical destiny, the crown offered legal inheritance. It reinforced the idea that the Third Reich was not an aberration, but a continuation. Why then prioritize its relocation and secure it with military precision? Why embed medieval regalia into modern political theater? Because regimes built on myth require artifacts that anchor those myths in tangible history. The crown did not grant power, it justified it. Top 6. The Emerald Tablet Fragments. In 1936, within the classified archives of the SS research organization, known as the Ahnenerbe, a series of translated manuscripts began circulating among a select group of scholars, occult researchers, and engineers. These documents did not reference conventional relics or imperial regalia. Instead, they focused on a legendary object considered one of the ultimate esoteric targets of the SS, the Emerald Tablet, also known as the Tabula Smaragdina. According to ancient Hermetic tradition, the Emerald Tablet was an engraved slab attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a mythical philosopher priest believed to possess divine knowledge. The text was said to contain the foundational principle of alchemy, summarized in the enigmatic phrase, "As above, so below." To mainstream historians, the tablet was a symbolic philosophical text. To the SS, it was something far more dangerous and potentially transformative. Within occult circles aligned with the Nazi regime, the tablet was believed to hold the secrets of transmutation, not only of metals, but of human potential itself. Central to this belief was the concept of vril, a supposed cosmic energy that could elevate humanity to a near-divine state. Heinrich Himmler and his inner circle became convinced that the Emerald Tablet contained encoded instructions for harnessing this energy. Some SS theorists even claimed the tablet originated from Atlantis, authored by Hermes Trismegistus, whom they regarded as an ancient Aryan high priest who survived a lost advanced civilization. The search for the Emerald Tablet was not theoretical. SS expeditions and intelligence units were dispatched to multiple regions. In Egypt, teams investigated tomb complexes in Giza and Saqqara, driven by the belief that original emerald fragments were buried alongside priest kings. In Tibet, during the 1938 SS expedition, researchers interrogated monks and lamas about hidden knowledge and ancient texts that might preserve Hermetic teachings. Within Germany itself, particularly in the Harz Mountains, SS units conducted excavations at sites associated with medieval secret societies, hoping to uncover relics or manuscripts linked to alchemical traditions. Recovered wartime records indicate that the SS successfully obtained ancient Arabic and Latin translations of the Emerald Tablet from occupied European libraries. These texts were classified and circulated among select researchers. The focus shifted from finding a literal emerald slab to decoding the knowledge contained within the writings. This pursuit intersected with one of the most mysterious technological projects of the Third Reich, Die Glocke, or the bell. Some accounts suggest that scientists involved in this program studied Hermetic principles from the Emerald Tablet, particularly theories concerning the interaction between matter and energy. The objective was ambitious, manipulating material structure to develop advanced propulsion systems, anti-gravity mechanisms, or entirely new classes of weaponry known as Wunderwaffe. Despite extensive efforts, no verifiable evidence ever surfaced confirming the discovery of genuine emerald fragments. Yet for Himmler and the SS elite, the absence of the physical artifact did not diminish its value. The true prize was the knowledge encoded within its texts, knowledge they believed could reshape science, spirituality, and power itself. Elements of these teachings were reportedly incorporated into symbolic rituals conducted at Muhlsburg Castle. the spiritual center of the SS. If the Emerald Tablet was merely allegorical, why were archaeological missions, intelligence operations, and advanced scientific projects linked to its pursuit? And if the physical artifact was never found, what knowledge did the SS believe they had already uncovered? And what were they trying to build with it? Top 7. The Imperial Sword. On March 15, 1938, as Adolf Hitler triumphantly entered Vienna following the Anschluss, the operation unfolding behind the scenes was far more deliberate than a political takeover. While crowds filled the streets, elite SS units moved with precision toward the Hofburg Palace. Their mission was not military, it was symbolic, ideological, and, in Hitler's mind, deeply mystical. Just as the Spear of Destiny was secured in a tightly controlled operation, another relic of immense significance was seized at the very same place and time: the imperial sword of the Holy Roman Empire. Forged in the 11th century and later refined for imperial ceremonies, the imperial sword was one of the most sacred objects of the Holy Roman Empire. Adorned with gold and engraved with Latin inscriptions invoking divine authority, it symbolized the emperor's duty to defend the faith and wield justice. During coronation rituals, the sword represented not merely power, but power sanctioned by destiny. To Hitler, who was obsessed with historical legitimacy and imperial continuity, this was no ordinary artifact. It was proof that the Third Reich stood as the rightful successor to the First Reich, the Holy Roman Empire. Within hours of Austria's annexation, the imperial sword, alongside the Spear of Destiny and the imperial crown, was removed from the Vienna imperial treasury under strict SS supervision. This was not looting. It was a calculated ritual of succession. Hitler ordered the regalia transported not to Berlin, but to Nuremberg, the symbolic heart of the Nazi movement in the historic city of imperial assemblies. In his vision, history was not being rewritten, it was being restored. Nazi ideology framed these relics as a unified triad of power. The crown symbolized sovereign authority, the sword embodied military force and justice, and the spear represented destiny and divine will. SS leadership, particularly Heinrich Himmler, reinforced this symbolism through ceremonial staging, architectural alignment, and orchestrated exhibitions designed to evoke reverence and historical inevitability. These artifacts were presented not as museum pieces, but as sacred instruments of a reborn empire. As the war intensified, the imperial sword and its companion relics were hidden deep within fortified underground vaults beneath Nuremberg, including the heavily secured Panier's bunker. Guarded by loyal SS units and shielded from bombardment, the artifacts were treated with a level of protection comparable to strategic military assets. In 1945, Allied forces, aided by intelligence and the Monument's men, uncovered the concealed chamber behind a false wall, just in time to prevent the relics from being destroyed or disappearing into clandestine networks. The imperial sword was eventually returned to Vienna, where it remains on display. Yet the true extent of its ceremonial and ideological role within the Nazi power structure remains partially obscured, buried within fragmented and classified wartime records. If the Spear of Destiny symbolized the right to rule, and the imperial sword embodied the power to enforce that rule, then the Nazi seizure of both in the same moment was no coincidence. It was a declaration. But was it merely propaganda, or the execution of a ritual Hitler believed would legitimize his empire for 1,000 years? Top 8. The Sebo Sword. In 1825, on the remote Norwegian island of Cebu, a farmer digging through an ancient burial mound uncovered a corroded Viking sword. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a relic of a forgotten warrior, its blade deliberately bent in accordance with Norse burial rituals. But etched along its surface were faint and unusual runic markings, symbols that would puzzle scholars for over a century. Then in the 1930s, the sword drew the attention of an organization that viewed such artifacts not as remnants of history, but as keys to humanity's true origin, the SS Ahnenerbe. By the time Nazi Germany occupied Norway in 1940, the Sebo sword had already been documented and studied by European runologists. Measuring roughly 36 inches in length, the iron blade bore a rare and controversial inscription. Some scholars interpreted the runes as a cryptic invocation, while others believed they encoded a name, ritual phrase, or a symbolic formula tied to ancient Germanic priesthoods. The ambiguity only heightened its value in the eyes of Nazi ideologues, who were determined to prove that Nordic civilizations represented the purest expression of Aryan heritage. Under SS supervision, systematic efforts were launched to catalog and analyze Viking artifacts across occupied Scandinavia. The Sabu sword became a focal point in runic and symbolic studies, with researchers examining the blade's engravings using magnification, comparative rune charts, and metallurgical assessments. Reports emphasized the possibility that the inscription reflected esoteric knowledge preserved through elite warrior or priestly lineages. In Nazi ideological frameworks, such symbols were not decorative. They were perceived as carriers of ancient power, memory, and identity. During World War II, the sword suffered severe corrosion and deterioration, officially attributed to earlier preservation methods and environmental exposure. However, the timing raised questions. As Nazi research into runes intensified, documentation surrounding the sword became fragmented. Some photographs and analytical records referenced in academic and wartime files were later found to be missing. Whether this resulted from wartime destruction, deliberate removal, or classified research remains unresolved. After the war, what remained of the saber sword was preserved in Norway, its runic inscription still debated and partially obscured by time. No definitive translation has ever been universally accepted. Yet the intense interest shown by the SS reveals that, to them, the sword was more than an archaeological artifact. It was potential proof that ancient Nordic societies possessed a symbolic and spiritual system worthy of becoming the ideological foundation of a new empire. If a single Viking blade could be seen as a blueprint for cultural and spiritual dominance, what might have emerged had its inscription been fully understood? And how many other artifacts, carrying messages from a distant past, were quietly absorbed into classified archives during the Reich's search for ancestral power? Top 9. The Bayeux Tapestry. In June 1940, just days after German forces marched into Paris, a specialized cultural unit operating under SS authority began tracking one of Europe's most significant historical artifacts. Their objective was not gold, weaponry, or state archives, but a 230-foot-long embroidered cloth housed in Normandy, the Bayeux Tapestry. Officially, it was a masterpiece of medieval art. Unofficially, to Nazi ideologues and Ahnenerbe researchers, it was a visual record of Germanic conquest, evidence that the domination of Europe by Aryan-descended peoples was not only historical, but inevitable. Created in the 11th century and measuring approximately 230 feet in length and about 20 inches in height, the Bayeux Tapestry vividly depicts the Norman conquest of England in 1066. Through 58 detailed scenes and hundreds of figures, knights, ships, animals, and celestial signs, it narrates the rise of William the Conqueror, whose Norman lineage traced back to Viking settlers of Scandinavian origin. To the Nazi worldview, this connection transformed the tapestry into more than a historical document. It became what they considered visual proof of ancient Germanic expansion and dominance across Europe. By 1941, the artifact had come under the close scrutiny of the Ahnenerbe, the SS organization dedicated to researching and validating the ancestral history of the so-called Aryan race. Teams of scholars, historians, photographers, and technicians were dispatched to study it in extraordinary detail. Using precision cameras and measurement tools, calibrated in inches and fractions thereof, they documented stitching patterns, fabric composition, pigments, heraldic symbols, and maritime designs. Every figure and emblem was analyzed for ethnic, cultural, and symbolic significance that could reinforce Nazi racial ideology. As the war intensified, the tapestry was relocated multiple times under strict supervision to protect it from bombing and to maintain German control. It was stored in fortified locations, including the Château de Sourches and later the Louvre in Paris, both under German authority. Access was tightly restricted, documentation was classified, and detailed photographic archives were compiled, some of which later appeared incomplete or partially missing in post-war records. In August 1944, as Allied forces closed in on Paris SS officers reportedly prepared to transport the Bayeux Tapestry to Germany. Orders were issued, transport arrangements discussed, and security protocols established. Yet the operation was never completed. The rapid advance of Allied troops and the destabilization of German command structures halted the plan at the final stage. The tapestry remained in France, narrowly avoiding disappearance into the vast network of hidden Nazi repositories. After the war, fragments of Ahnenerbe documentation surfaced, revealing the depth of the SS's analytical and ideological investment in the artifact. Yet significant portions of their research were missing, presumed destroyed, classified, or absorbed into post-war intelligence archives. If a medieval tapestry was studied with the precision of a strategic asset, what conclusions did Nazi researchers believe it confirmed? And if history itself could be curated, framed, and weaponized through ancient artifacts, how many other narratives were rewritten long before the war ever reached the battlefield? Top 10. The Codex Aesinas. In the autumn of 1943, as Allied forces advanced across Italy and the Axis front began to fracture, a quiet but urgent operation unfolded in the countryside near Jesi. SS officers, accompanied by scholars and intelligence personnel, arrived at a secluded estate belonging to the noble Baldeschi-Baliani family. Their target was neither military nor political. It was a manuscript, aged, fragile, and considered invaluable. Known as the Codex Aesinas, it contained one of the only surviving copies of Germania, written by the Roman historian Tacitus nearly 2,000 years earlier. To the Nazi regime, this was not merely a historical document. It was ideological proof. The Codex Aesinas, produced in the 9th century on parchment, preserved Tacitus's detailed account of the Germanic tribes, their customs, social structures, warfare, and moral codes. Measuring roughly 12 inches in height and bound in a format typical of medieval scriptoria, the manuscript represented a rare bridge between classical antiquity and medieval Europe. What made it extraordinary was that it preserved content derived from the long-lost Codex Hirschfeldensis, one of the earliest and most important sources of Tacitus's work. Without it, large portions of Germania might have vanished from history. For Heinrich Himmler and the SS, Germania was more than scholarship. It was a blueprint for racial and cultural identity. The text described the Germanic peoples as resilient, honorable, and uncorrupted by Roman decadence, characteristics the Nazi regime elevated into ideological doctrine. The Ahnenerbe and SS scholars treated the Codex Aesinas as both a scientific artifact and a strategic asset, capable of reinforcing the intellectual and historical legitimacy of the Aryan narrative. Following Italy's armistice with the Allies in September 1943, German forces swiftly secured key cultural and strategic targets. The Codex Aesinas was placed under SS protection, with documented plans to transport it to Germany. Preservation specialists and researchers were assigned to examine and replicate the manuscript using advanced photographic and archival techniques. Detailed reproductions were created, and restricted reports analyzed its linguistic structure, historical implications, and propagandistic potential. As the war turned decisively against Germany, the manuscript's trail became uncertain. Records indicate that transport plans were altered repeatedly amid collapsing supply lines in advancing Allied forces. Some SS documentation was destroyed, other files disappeared. Yet unlike many artifacts seized during the war, the Codex Aesinas resurfaced in Italy after the conflict, largely intact, though the full extent of Nazi research and reproduction efforts was never completely recovered or disclosed. The survival of the manuscript raised unsettling questions. If the original was preserved, what became of the copies, analyses, and ideological frameworks built around it? Allied intelligence units collected vast archives of Nazi research, but many documents were classified for decades, and some remain incomplete or missing. If a single manuscript could be treated as a strategic instrument capable of reshaping identity, history, and geopolitical destiny, then the Nazi pursuit of artifacts was never about the past alone. It was about controlling the narrative of humanity itself. These artifacts reveal a pattern that is difficult to ignore. They were not random curiosities gathered by an eccentric regime. They formed a structured pursuit of authority, legitimacy, and knowledge that extended far beyond conventional warfare. From medieval regalia and biblical relics to alchemical manuscripts and lost libraries, each object represented a different dimension of power. Spiritual mandate, historical continuity, intellectual dominance. This was not simple superstition, it was systematic acquisition. Research divisions were established, expeditions were funded, documents were classified, artifacts were relocated under armed guard, photographic evidence disappeared, archives were sealed. The repetition is consistent. Whenever an object was believed to reinforce ideology or unlock hidden advantage, it was removed from public scrutiny and absorbed into restricted channels. Governments after the war inherited these files, and many remained partially redacted or inaccessible. What was lost in this process may extend beyond the objects themselves. Each relic represented potential influence over narrative, belief, or scientific direction. If ancient manuscripts contain insights into engineering or cosmology, their suppression would mean more than historical loss. If symbolic regalia anchored political authority, their manipulation shaped perception across millions. Every confiscated artifact may represent a chapter of human development, redirected or concealed. The more unsettling implication is that such patterns rarely end with one regime. Systems of power protect themselves. Information that challenges established structures is often filtered, reclassified, or quietly archived. The search for relics may have ended in 1945, but the management of knowledge did not. The question is not whether these artifacts possess supernatural power. The question is why so many were considered too significant to leave in public hands. When authority seeks ancient symbols and forgotten texts with military precision, it suggests belief in something deeper than myth. History may record battles and treaties, but beneath those records lies another pursuit entirely. And until every archive is open, the line between legend and strategy will remain deliberately blurred. If these stories of lost relics and the hunt for ancient power have changed the way you perceive the hidden corners of history, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury. Join us as we plant the seeds of the future. The next vault of secrets will be open soon.